On first down, they hand off to Marlin Mack. Huge hole, 50-yard line. He's at the 40, still going near sideline. He's at the 10. He's at the 5, and he will score. Touchdown, Marlin Mack. Touchdown, INDY. And again, it's picked off. It's Darius Leonard. Leonard with a second INT, and he's streaking down the near sideline. He's at the 40. He's at the 30. He's at the 20. He's going to go. A pick six for the Maniac. Kenny Moore gets to Deshaun Watson. That's a sack for Kenny Moore. Kenny has a pick and now a sack in the game.
Horseshoe is back, baby. The horseshoe is back.
What is up, Colts Nation? Welcome back to the Bring the Juice podcast. I'm your co-host, Derek Larger. Joining me, as always, is your other co-host, Cody Felger. Cody, how are you doing after this great Memorial Day weekend?
Oh, man, it was amazing. And I know we were texting a little bit ago just how refreshing it was. Truly was awesome to just spend time with friends and family. So, man, I'm feeling excited and rejuvenated and ready to talk some Colts football.
Man, I am three bottles of Coke in right now. I am ready to go. So, all right, today we're going to talk to you guys. We're introducing a new series here, and it's going to take hold over the next few weeks here, where we are going to break down each draft class of the Chris Ballard era, and we're going to rank the picks from the worst pick in our opinion to the best in our opinion, from the 2017, 2018, 2019 class and the 2020 class. We're going to basically just do our least favorite pick to our most favorite pick, what we think might happen, sort of stuff like that. And then after ranking each and one of these, we're going to then talk about our top 10 favorite draft picks and then our top 10 worst draft picks of the Chris Ballard era. So it's going to be interesting for sure. We're hoping that this is a series that you guys will appreciate and enjoy and just kind of see how we feel about certain draft picks. And we'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments too about who's your favorite, who's your least favorite, whether you agree or disagree with us. But let's hop into this here. We're going to start with the 2017 draft class for the Indianapolis Colts. Cody, let's just start this from the worst pick all the way to our favorite. So in your opinion, what was the worst pick of the 2017 draft?
Yeah, I think this one's fairly obvious. It's Zach Banner, 4th round pick, offensive tackle out of USC. I mean, he didn't even make the final 53-man roster. This is a guy that coming in, and we know how bad that Colts offensive line was in 2017. So if that tells you anything, it tells you how bad this selection was. It's kind of funny, Derek, because a couple years ago, like obviously before the draft, I was like, I'm looking at some offensive tackle prospects, and I saw Zach Banner, and I actually tweeted out the Colts should look at a guy like Zach Banner. He was a humongous human being, like ginormous.
Yeah, ginormous human being, yes.
Yeah, but unfortunately, he apparently was like a teddy bear. Was not very aggressive, didn't really have that mean streak that the Colts were looking for on their offensive line. Colts release him before the regular season starts. He has zero impact. Now I know he doesn't really start in the league, but I think he has found a home in Pittsburgh as kind of a reserve offensive tackle. So it's not like he's been a complete bust in the league. He's still, on a team, which I think is significant. But in terms of for the Colts, the impact he had for the Colts, he had none, zero impact. And so for me, it's a no-brainer here. Zach Banner is the worst pick here in the 2017 draft.
All right, I'm going to make sure I got this thing right here. I want to make sure that I get it. So yeah, it was down to me between Zach Banner and Tyrell Bastion. So obviously, I mean, when you look at both of these, I mean, one was a 3rd round pick, the other was a 4th round pick. They were picked right after Banner was picked right after Bastion. I don't know. It's hard for me to say it was Zach because, I guess you can say it because I had more high hopes for a Zach Banner because, you thought, a 4th round pick like Zach Banner, a giant guy. You think if he just cleaned up his mechanics a little bit, I mean, this guy could be a solid right tackle. He's got the size for it. No question about it. But, I didn't have any expectations for Tyrell Bastion coming in. And, he just as much as Zach Boehner never really contributed that much for the Colts either. But I probably will have to go with you on the Zach Boehner story because, again, Boehner didn't really get much of a chance because it just didn't work out. So yeah, I'm going to go with Zach here as well. And then for me, I think I probably already mentioned it, that my second worst was Tyrell Bastion. Again, I didn't have much expectations for this guy. He kind of seemed like he was that edge rusher that could go into that 3-4 system that the Colts are trying to get into at one point. But I mean, again, Bastion was a little bit of a stretch picking a defensive end from a MAC school in round 3. That's kind of a risky one, and ultimately it just didn't work out. Yeah, he's definitely my next guy too. Yeah, I think the argument that I would make against why I have Zach Boehner as the worst and then Tyrell Bastion as the second worst is because Tyrell Bastion actually played some games for them in 2017. I think he had 3 or 4 sacks that year. So he was a contributor. He showed some flashes. He was actually on the team 2 years, and then he got cut, I think, mid-season in 2018. And so he impacted and helped the team a little bit, albeit not very much, but he still impacted the team. But yeah, you're right. He's a guy, coming out of Ohio. He played with his hand in the dirt a lot at Ohio, but yeah, he was more of a 3-4 type of guy that would translate to the 3-4 scheme the Colts were running under Chuck Pagano and company. And then obviously when they hired Frank Reich and Matt Eberflus, they switched back to a 4-3 Tampa 2 type of defense. And so didn't really fit, Basham's kind of playing style. And I think now he's with the Jets with a slew of other defensive players previously on the Colts. So yeah, Tyrell Bastion, absolutely is the second worst guy on the list here for me. Now we can move on, I guess, to the third worst guy, worst pick. Undoubtedly Quincy Wilson. And I would say Quincy Wilson just because of how high he was picked. He definitely is a guy that I think, for me at least, I expected him to come in and be a number 1 corner and be a very good corner for the Colts. He showed flashes of it, but never really put it all together, never really played at the level he was drafted to play at. And I think especially with that high second-round pick, you expect the guy to come in and really contribute right away, right? You look at some of the other second-round picks, which we'll get to in later episodes, like for the most part, those guys have come in and contributed and played pretty well for the Colts, and that's what I was expecting with Quincy Wilson. Not a guy that's kind of hovering at that second or third corner position, sometimes being a healthy scratch last year, and then ultimately getting traded away for a 6th-round selection. So for me, Quincy Wilson is the third worst draft pick for me, just because of one, where he was drafted, and also just he wasn't absolutely terrible in my opinion with the Colts, but for a second-round pick, I think he definitely was a big draft bust for sure. So that's who I have there for my next worst guy for the Colts. Who do you have here, Derek? Yeah, you hit it on the head there. The Quincy Wilson pick was obviously a head scratcher at the end. You draft a cornerback in the second round, you anticipate them to potentially be a starter at some point. And, it became a point where Quincy Wilson was a healthy scratch. I mean, they just didn't want to play him, which, might say a lot about who the kind of player he is. It stinks because, there were some games where he truly dominated and then there was just weeks where he just couldn't guard anybody. So it was the inconsistency that was a huge issue, and Quincy's what appeared to be lack of motivation to want to get better and improve his craft. So again, we kind of talked about it already this offseason about Quincy Wilson now being with the Jets. So, unfortunately, no longer a part of the Indianapolis Colts. And the next guy here, we can start getting to some guys who, actually are contributors now or once were contributors. But, I think it's funny. We're starting to go a little bit with, we're thinking alike here. Might be different for the next draft class that we talk about, but this one's kind of similar. I think the next one is Nate Hairston for me after Quincy Wilson, because, obviously Nate no longer on the Colts, but, was that cornerback that could play in the box, play outside. There's a guy that could play special teams. He was a good role player when he was with the Indianapolis Colts. It's unfortunate that we weren't able to keep him, but again, he was a good contributor while he was there. And he's going to find a new home in New York as well, along with Quincy Wilson. So that's going to be a funny story. But yeah, Nate Hairston is the next guy for me. Who do you have, Cody?
Yeah, Nate Hairston also. Yeah, he's a guy. I mean, he's a fifth-round guy, so it's not like you expected him to come in and light the world on fire. I ultimately, I thought for where he was drafted, I thought it was a decent pick. I mean, he was a guy that contributed a lot, I believe, in 2017. And then, there was just more talented guys on the roster and the depth chart started to get more and more deep, and you just can't keep the amount of corners that it would take to keep a Nate Hairston. And so that's why he was let go and ultimately, finds a different home now with the Jets. But yeah, you're right. He's a guy that, I thought he played pretty decent with the Colts, but ultimately there were better options out there for the team. And so they decided they were going to do that. So I agree there. Okay. And so the next guy here, I don't know if we're going to agree on this one, but I think we probably will. It's probably going to hurt you to say a little bit, Derek, but I got Multicooker here as the next guy. Because of where he was drafted, first off. Obviously, he's contributed a ton more than Quincy Wilson has. But, I look at it from this standpoint, Derek. When you draft a guy 15th overall, he undoubtedly, you expect him to be a Pro Bowl All-Pro player, right? And you also expect him to undoubtedly earn a second contract. And at least from all the signs that I've seen, it doesn't appear like Multicooker may not get that second contract. And when you invest the kind of draft capital you do in a guy like Multicooker, especially how high you drafted him, I think that's my reasoning why I think he's the next guy on my list. And I know that's probably going to be a little controversial here, and you're probably going to disagree with me here, but let me hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I am going to disagree with you. I'm going with Grover Stewart as my next one. I'm sorry. I'll talk with Malik about that one in a minute, but I'm going to go with Grover Stewart here, mainly just because I mean, obviously Grover Stewart has been a role player. He's been a role player. He's been that defensive tackle that's come in, has done, the small stuff that occasionally shows up on the stat sheet. Kenny Moore and others have actually said that they anticipate Grover Stewart to break out this year. They actually think that this is the year you remember Grover Stewart's name and he earns that second contract that he's going to get. So if that tells you anything, then that's great. I'm super glad to see what Grover Stewart can make. I'm going to go next and go with Multicooker as the third best pick in this draft because of the reason that you mentioned. It stinks that, as the first round pick, we expected a lot more out of him, but again, he had that injury the first year. If it wasn't for that, he was leading the NFL in interceptions when he went down. He was leading the NFL in interceptions. He actually looked like he could potentially have gotten Rookie of the Year that first year. So he was on pace. And all of 2018, we kept saying how the stats don't show up on the stat sheet because that doesn't happen doesn't mean Multicooker wasn't playing the way that we wanted him to. He was being that ball hawk that nobody wanted to throw the ball near because of his ability. And I hope that this season, Eberflus does allow him to play more of that single high safety. I want him to play more of that because that is where Multicooker thrives. That's what we need him to do. And if Rock Ya-Sin keeps up what he's doing and hopefully he gets better, then we can see more of those packages. I just think Multicooker was sometimes put into a bad situation where he didn't necessarily thrive in. Yes, the production and sometimes the attitude from Multicooker obviously wasn't there. And that's why he's not higher. But I mean, again, what I've seen so far, I can't discount the injuries he's faced and the fact that, just because his stats aren't there doesn't mean he wasn't being productive. So that's my third. What was your third in this?
Yeah, then I guess Grover Stewart would be the next one. So we just flip-flop there, but That's an interesting topic. I like kind of this debate that we're having about Multicooker because I think it's valuable. I think it's a debate that's really, a lot of Colts fans are talking and debating about, on Twitter and on social media and everywhere. I guess, you talking about the injuries and stuff. I think that's one of the reasons also why I kind of put him there because, he hasn't played all 16 games since he's been drafted in 2017. Now I get it. I'm a big Multicooker guy myself. Like, I don't want it to seem like I dislike Multicooker. I think he's not good. I think he's a good player. I'm not saying I think he's terrible or anything even close to that. I think for me, I'm just saying where you drafted him, I would want to see him being an all-pro type of player. Now, I know scheme goes into it. I know there's certain things. Injuries have played a factor. But for me, I want my 15th overall pick, my first-round pick, to get a second contract and then not be up in the air. That's just my opinion. That's just my thoughts on it. But, yeah, Grover Stewart is the next guy that I have. And, he's a guy that I feel like he's kind of was a little bit of a late bloomer in this draft class. He's a guy that didn't really see a lot of the field the first couple of years. And then last year, he really just, he took that starting nose tackle, that one tech position. Marcus Hunt got benched. Grover Stewart took it, and he did not relent. And I think that's similar to kind of Kari Willis last year. You had a veteran in there who you felt like you could replace him eventually in Marcus Hunt, and Grover Stewart comes in and he takes it. And he not only takes it, he plays super well. I mean, he has more sacks than your entire 3 technique just himself, and he's a big defensive tackle. And so, he's a very good run defender. I feel like he's getting a little bit better in his pass rush ability. And I certainly think that him and Sheldon Day are going to make a pretty good duo there in the defensive interior at that one technique position. And so I really like Grover Stewart quite a lot. And he's a guy that I did not know. I did not know how I'd feel. If you asked me even last year, how do you feel about Grover Stewart? I would have said, I don't know if I'd give him a second contract. And I haven't really seen a lot of him, right? Mm-hmm. But, after the season that he had, I think it's one of the most underrated seasons of the entire players on the Colts roster. I think he had probably the most underrated season out of anybody. So he's undoubtedly a guy that I think, honestly, this might be a little bit crazy to say, but out of all of these draft picks, based off of the Colts moves and what they have kind of indicated, I think Grover Stewart's probably the most likely to get a contract extension out of any of these guys. So
that's not unfair to say. It's really not.
So, yep, Grover Stewart. Yep, we just flip-flop there.
All right, so who's your second then? Second favorite.
Okay, yeah. Second's probably Anthony Walker. I like Anthony Walker quite a lot, especially when he was drafted in the 5th round. I feel like it's kind of crazy. People, some people are saying he's overrated. Some people are saying he's underrated. I think he's been a solid player for the Colts. I really do. And I think, he has his limitations. He's not a Darius Leonard. He doesn't have the athletic ability of Bobby Okereke, but he is a leader on that defense. I mean, Darius Leonard talked about it and said, hey, he's a guy, when I came in my rookie year, he's a guy that taught me the ropes. And so I think that can't be understated either. And I honestly think the Colts are going to re-sign him. I do. I think they should re-sign him. I think it makes a lot of sense. He's not going to likely demand a ton of money, hopefully. Hopefully he'll take kind of a hometown discount type of thing. But he's been a solid player. I mean, he led the Colts in tackles last year. Now, I know Darius Leonard missed a few games, but he's been a guy that's been consistently pretty good for the Colts at the linebacker position. And we saw Derek for years and years. That linebacker position was just abysmal, to say the least, right? Yeah. And then Anthony Walker got drafted, Darius Leonard, Bobby Okereke. For me, it's like, why would you want to let a guy go that has had so much of an impact on the field, but also just off the field with those linebackers? I mean, I guarantee you all those linebackers look up to Anthony Walker because it's crazy because he was only drafted in 2017, but he is the veteran and the kind of the old man, if you will, in that linebacker room. And, he's a guy that was a captain at Northwestern. He's a guy that's always been a captain. And he's the captain on that defense. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to do that. I actually saw a tweet or maybe read an article about, I don't know if you're old enough. I don't even remember this, but I kind of read an article about it. David Thornton, who I believe has worked for the Colts now. He was a linebacker that the Colts had, and they decided to let him walk. And I think Jim Irsay said he was like, Jim Irsay or Bill Polian, one of them basically said that they regretted letting him walk. And they kind of were paralleling it to Anthony Walker, right? Maybe not the best linebacker in the world, maybe not the most flashy linebacker in the world, but a key piece to your defense. And you can't afford to let a guy like that walk. And so I think for Anthony Walker, he's a guy that, he's had those times where, he hasn't been the greatest linebacker, but he hasn't been bad. He's been solid. He's been borderline above average, I would say. And, throwing in just the impact he has on the other linebackers, the impact he has on that defense in that locker room, I definitely think he's a guy that the Colts should really look at re-signing. And I think he's undoubtedly one of the top players in this draft class.
And I want to thank you, Cody, because from everything you just said, you just proved my point of why he's number one to me. I'm going to go with Marlon Mack as number two as my favorite one in this draft. Look, I'll get into Anthony Walker here in a second, but Marlon Mack, obviously, for the common, what people like to really say nowadays is that you say, oh, you don't need to draft a running back until late. You don't really need to, unless they're top tier running backs. You don't really need to go after them early because, you can always get that undrafted free agent running back or a 6th, 7th round running back. And as long as you got a decent offensive line, then that undrafted free agent or that late round running back is going to do enough for you. But Marlon Mack obviously has came into a situation with a crappy offensive line from the very beginning. So obviously Marlon had to pick up the pieces and had to pick up the slack when it came to that running back room, which again was also very thin as well. I mean, everything was kind of thin at that point in 2017 when Chris Ballard first took the job. I mean, let's be honest. He was doing his best to get rid of every single Ryan Grigson pick, except for the exception of a few. So Marlon Mack, a guy that obviously in these last few years has come on very strong, has improved his vision, his patience, and his running style. He's just built for how you want a running back to be in the NFL nowadays. Can play as a power guy, but also is just a very shifty kind of guy. Doesn't have great top end speed or anything, but can make that big play when you need him to. So at that Pacific time, I mean, obviously Marlon Mack was a very good one, but the reason number one, Anthony Walker, why I have him in as the best pick in the 2017 draft. Let me remind you, folks, he was a 5th round draft pick. He was the 161st draft pick, a linebacker out of Northwestern. Most people didn't know who he was. He walked into a situation where the defense was in shambles. He had nothing. There was nothing to help him within that linebacker room. Not a single thing. So Anthony Walker, 5th round pick. Most people, when they draft a linebacker in the 5th round, never start, or at least if they do, they start very little. And you come in and you're supposed to be the leader of this defense, right? You're the middle linebacker. You're the Mike linebacker. You're the guy that's supposed to make sure the defense is running the right formations, that everything is on point, everything of that nature. And from day one, Anthony Walker came in there, did his job, missed very few games, did not get injured very often, and has been the reliable, dependable option in the middle. Now, I understand Darius Leonard now and Bobby Okereke of the future are probably going to be the 1-2 punch in the linebacker room. I understand that. But the impact of what Anthony Walker has done for this team cannot be understated. He has been the most reliable piece on this defense since he has come into the league. There's no question about it. I don't care what anyone says about Darius Leonard. Anthony Walker has been more reliable. He was there a year earlier. He's missed fewer games. I mean, it's just simply he's been around and he's also been going a little longer. And like you said, he's a leader. He led the team in tackles last year. And I mean, obviously when we're starting to look at, I'm probably going to come out with a video at some point about how of the Anthony Walker situation and how we're going to start looking at cap spaces. but everyone started looking at who are the top 10 linebackers from this last season that were being paid, right? And I think Joe Schobert, was the 10th, and he was like earning $9.75 million a year, somewhere around $10 million, somewhere around there. I would say Anthony Walker, if he's gonna be, I think Anthony Walker realistically will ask for anywhere from $7 to like $9 million, which if that's what he's gonna ask for, I'm going for that the whole way. I'm going for that the whole way because he's been reliable. He's been there. He's been a leader. He's effective. He may not be the greatest linebacker ever. You don't have to pay him like a top 10 linebacker. You don't have to. I don't think Anthony Walker's ego is so high to the point where he views himself as the almighty god of linebackers. I don't think that. I think you could easily get him for a very solid team-friendly contract of around 4 years, 35 to 36 million. Maybe a tad less, but that's something that I could realistically see happen. So Anthony Walker is my number one guy.
Yeah, Derek, I mean, I totally hear you on that. I think for me, the reason why I have Marlon Mack at number one, for me, yeah, I know the running back position, a lot of people argue, hey, you can find a running back anywhere. But, its stats are kind of any indication, especially looking at that 2018 season when Marlon Mack missed some time there in the first few games. I mean, the Colts offense was near the bottom of the league. You just saw the difference when Marlon Mack came back. A running game went from one of the worst in the league to one of the better ones in the league. And so for me, I know they drafted Jonathan Taylor. I know Marlon Mack has missed a little bit of time, but I think for me overall, I think when he's been on the field and he's gotten the ball in his hands, he's been the most electric player that the Colts have had. And I just think, for me, he's a guy that, especially being drafted in the fourth round, you can be boom or bust sometimes with some of these guys, but he has been a guy that is consistently, he's gotten better. Like he's just continues to get better year by year. I mean, it's wild to see the difference from his rookie year, even to his second year. Like his vision has it's grown exponentially. It's crazy just to see how much better he has gotten over the years. And I think he's continuing now. He's continued to enter his prime. I mean, the Colts drafted him, I believe he was 21. So he's a guy that's still very, very young, but it'll be super exciting to kind of see, how does he continue to develop now with Jonathan Taylor? We've touched on it before, right? We think that, these guys basically, sharing touches a little bit will help them with the durability game and that aspect. And so Marlon Mack for me, I think is just a guy that is just every time he's on the field, he's electric and he's a playmaker for the Colts. And especially the last few years when the Colts have had a lack of playmakers, he's been a guy that's been consistently one of those guys that's given a spark and the offense a shot in the arm that they needed. So that's why I have him there at number one. But we'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this, all our listeners, kind of what you think about, this draft class. There's obviously some not very good picks, and there are obviously some pretty good picks, some very good value picks that we felt like the Colts made. What are your thoughts? Who do you think is the worst pick? I think that one's fairly obvious. Who do you think is the best pick? And what do you think about the whole Malik Hooker kind of debate that Derek and I had? We'd love to hear your guys' comments. But for Derek and myself, thank you guys so much. As always, go Colts.